Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sales Syndicate podcast. I think this is episode 49. I haven't recorded for a couple of weeks, so apologies up front if I'm a little bit rusty. It feels weird not having recorded in 2 weeks, but baptism of fire, I've got 5 scheduled in the next 3 days, so it's going to be a busy few days. But we're going to be talking about, I guess, like the rise of the hybrid sales rep, or at least the hybrid sales rep in its, I don't know, I guess methodology, what we mean by it, and some top tips in there as usual as well. But before we jump into the topic, I will hand over to my guest, Harry, to introduce himself and the company as well.
Thank you very much, Jamie. So I'm Harry Harvey. I'm the Regional Sales Director at Klaxoon, looking after UK, Nordics, Netherlands, Asia Pacific, quite a slice of the world from my team. In Klaxoon, we're the workshop company. We are a SaaS platform that works with companies all over the world to help them have more efficient and engaging meetings, regardless of where they are. That's the kind of the nutshell piece for us.
And we first met at the T&W conference in Amsterdam. We were walking around with a camera and a microphone, and you were one of our victims. That's probably the right word for it.
No, it was good on the day. It was something to break it up as we were going around. We had the event stand at T&W our first time down there, and it was unusual to hear this British West Country voice come along on the stand, not where I expected it.
And it was unfortunately one of the clips that we had an issue with, let's say, with the sound. We had a new microphone, which has swiftly been sent back to Curry's. It wasn't a Curry's brand, so I'm not going to throw them under the bus, but it's gone back. We've got our money back, and we'll have a new one for the next show. So hopefully, if you recorded the show again, we'll actually be able to share some of the footage that we have. But this is the reason why we invited you back on the podcast, because we think it went well, and we wanted to get you back on to talk about something a bit bigger and broader for a longer sort of period of times. But we had our kickoff, and then I think you checked out my LinkedIn profile, and we found out that we actually went to the same school a year apart, of all things.
Yeah, and it really illustrates how crazy and small the world is. So longing back to maroon blazers and those sorts of things. But yeah, you are the first school alumni I've met in my professional career. So yeah,
I would. Yeah, no, 100%. I spoke to. Do you remember Kyle Hughes? I think he would have been your year. Yeah. So he's going to come on the podcast, and the only reason I spoke with Kyle is because he used to work with someone that I had on the podcast, and again, small world. He was like, "Oh, how do you know Jamie?" And then it looped back round, and he's coming on the podcast as well. But yeah,
we were in the same form, me and Kyle.
Mental. Yeah. Well, when Kyle comes on in a few weeks, I'll have to let him know that we spoke. But yeah, like you said, maroon blazers, year 7, day 1. You had a blazer that was about 4 sizes too big because your mum wanted it to last for the full 7 or 8 years that you were at senior school. But yeah, good times. It was. I haven't been back since. Not that it's normal to go back since, but
no resets of the old PCSE to go back and
thankfully not. I managed to blag my way through that, and I will not be doing it again. But anyway, back to the actual discussion that people hopefully hear for, rather than our history of the Crip school. We're going to be talking about the hybrid sales rep. Before we sort of, I guess, jump into the how-to part of it, the background, the meat of the conversation, do you want to just give us a bit of an acknowledgement of like what we mean by that hybrid sales rep, so like a definition per se?
Yeah, and I think it's, and this is such a term we all hear over and over again, but the way that we've worked has changed, right? And a lot of that change was forced upon us by the global pandemic that we all sat through, and then we've had the period since where organisations have adjusted. But one of the big things that's come from that is the way salespeople work. I think it's fair to say pre-pandemic, we were traditionally looking to secure more face-to-face meetings with clients, right? And spending that office on-site time. And then we would work traditionally from in the office, doing our calls, doing all of our other bits of admin from in there. Then we went virtual, right? We went remote over the pandemic. We weren't meeting people face-to-face. And now we find ourselves in between those two things, where we are coming to the office, but then we are working from home, and we're holding client meetings, either virtual, in person, or maybe even blended, or maybe not, because that might be a little bit intimidating. I think that's what hybrid is. It's about working anywhere, anytime, and trying to be as effective as possible throughout that. That's a difficult thing to balance nowadays.
Now, I can see you're in the office today, and that was a fairly recent thing in terms of new office, wasn't it?
Yeah, so we've been in here for 3 weeks into this new office here in Birmingham city centre, and that is part of giving my team a better place to work from. Right, it's a nice serviced office. There's a brilliant cappuccino machine, all these sorts of things. They've got the caramel syrup that I requested, so it's all very important. And I can go and get the coffee as opposed to having to make somebody else's like when I'm at home. So that's really
Yeah,
good.
no, it's funny when you say about the coffee machine, because when the coffee machine is not working and we're waiting for the person to come out and fix it, it's bedlam. Like, people are not happy with the granulated Tesco Gold, whatever it is that's in the jar.
Yeah, I think that's the thing of if you've had the fancy coffee machine, it's hard to go that step back. And that can be the catalyst there. All if your staff go home, they go, I'm going to work from home this afternoon, the coffee machine.
And how long were you working from home before that? Because I think, from memory, I think you said it was quite a long time, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I did just over a year or so with this business where I've been primarily working from home, or if I was going out on client meetings a bit, I might set myself up in a serviced office in that city for the day or a couple of days. So I've done that post-pandemic. Straight after the pandemic, in my previous business, I was back into the office, and I found a need through the office to get some office time to be constructive with having two very, very young children at the time. That was a challenge in a small house. So, yeah, I dabbled in and out, but now I'm probably more majority in the office than working from home.
And which do you prefer personally? If you had to pick one or the other?
I pick office. Now, that is, for a whole variety of reasons, but also one of the big ones is it gives me that divide in my life of being able to, instead of working from my bedroom and rolling out of bed and going into the chair, and it's giving me that real separation by that commute of I can become work mode the salesperson on the way in, and on the way back I become that. That is, I think, more difficult for me at least to kind of switch between those when I'm in the same setting.
Yeah, no. So the act of getting up and putting on different clothes, and actually, for me, walking to work with headphones on and getting into the office, like you can't replicate that at home, and it just doesn't feel right. So I'm an office everyday person, even if it's empty. I was in the office on my own a few days last week, and it was a little bit bleak, but I can't sit at home. And I like the big monitor and the setup that I've got, and I don't want to lug that around. But it's in terms of that. You referenced something. I think you said it was like this sliding scales of hybrid sales reps. So do you want to just describe what you mean by that that scale?
Yeah, and I think this is partly down to companies and the restrictions that they put in place or the things that they impose, but also down to individuals. You have some people who are, we talk about digital nomads, right? Where these people will work anywhere around the world, and they will join virtual calls as long as they are working for the time zone of their market. I've had staff that have worked out in Dubai and things like that, not covering the patch just because they wanted to live there for a number of months, and they could work their working schedule around that. Where you've got the very other end of the spectrum, right, which is probably closer to yourself, Jamie, of people who are a bit more old-fashioned, want to be in the office Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, go out for an hour at lunch and keep a very traditional and structured approach. And I think there's few people who are on those extreme ends. You don't have that many people who are these digital nomads working here, there, and everywhere. But similarly, looking at your own business, how many people are joining you as being in all day, every day in that office? Is that a large number?
No, it's I would say majority of the roles that we filled in the last 3 to 6 months have been either fully remote or mostly hybrid.
And I think that's about the consideration where employers acknowledge that there's the benefit of having that critical interaction in person, right? And as part of what you alluded to is your office setup tends to have better investment and a better infrastructure setup for working in there than what you do at home, right? They're prepared to invest into their facilities at a different level. So there's a reason why people go in, and that is often because in that setting, for certain types of meetings or scenarios, you are more effective. So I think we see that most people now falling into that category of doing a bit of both, some working from home, some in the office, but the rules of when they come in might be very different.
I was speaking to someone called Holly Allen, I think 2 episodes ago. It's yet to come out, but I think she's now in Bali for 4 to 6 weeks or something, working out in Bali, which I don't know, from an outsider's perspective, I'm like, that sounds amazing. But then the other half of my brain's like, how would I cope doing 10-hour days whilst in a place like that, just looking out the window going, I'm on a laptop for 10 hours. And I'm just not sure I could do it.
I think it's about discipline. I think all remote workers need that discipline, right? Because it is so easy just to grab our tablet, chuck Netflix on it, or go and walk the dog, or have 1,000,001 other distractions. I mean, Bali, the beach is probably really rating up there with those high distractions. So I think it's something that everyone experiences in that remote role. And I have salespeople that come in because they know they find it easier to focus in the office away from some of those home-based distractions. I actually have people on the flip side as well who find that being in the office and all of that office banter that's going around, they find that distracting, and they'd rather be in a room by themselves so they can get their head down and no one distract them. I think it's an individual thing.
Yeah, and I guess when we're talking about that sliding scale, then if you took your own team, or perhaps broader team at Klaxoon, what does it mean for your team then in terms of that hybrid setup?
So I've obviously got the office here. Guys can come in and work from. Once people are past being onboarded, I'm quite free. I'd like people to come in for a couple of days a week, not prescribing that and insisting upon it, but I think there's a bit of an obligation, and the team understands the benefit of coming into the office and being able to overhear from experienced staff or turn around and ask for clarification on something which you just can't get to that same sense of urgency and that quick message from teams. Do you know what I mean? If you lean back and do the kind of round the corner thing, you get an immediate response. That being said, for my new starters, I get them in the office because it's so much. There's so much you learn from outside of the formal onboarding phase by hearing how other people pitch, by hearing conversations with clients and suppliers. It gives you a lot of context to the business. But over in France, where most of the business is based, the majority of staff do come in a couple of days a week. From a sales perspective, other departments are less prescriptive, but it's about their roles, and it's really about collaboration for our business. And we think it's important to ensure that people can have those critical interactions as effective as possible. And some of that really does come from looking a colleague in the eye.
Yeah, I've always been, I think the previous company I worked for, I joined Admiral Insurance, and my start date was the week that COVID just kicked off, and they basically said, we can't get you a laptop. And I didn't get a laptop for like 4 months. But then my actual onboarding was fully remote with people I had never met. And, there was, I think the wider marketing team there was like 80 people. And it was like a full onboarding that they had never done remote, because Admiral was a full 100% in-office business at the time. So they just weren't set up for it at all. There was no proper onboarding, no actual, I don't know, just no decks that were properly designed to be delivered like that. And it was horrendous from a new starter's perspective. And yeah, there's that real world interaction, and like you said, just leaning around a corner or just tapping someone on the shoulder and saying, I didn't understand what they were saying. What do they mean by that? I think, like you said, especially in the onboarding stage, it is critical.
And I think you would have had the very clear reaction of what a lot of companies had to do, right? Where they'd based their policies and how they'd done things around working in person, right? That's what we had traditionally done pre-pandemic. And then we saw a knee-jerk reaction to having to do things fully remotely. And so it was disaster recovery, sort of science, disaster response. And then we had people who looked to, over the period, make that better because they acknowledge, okay, this isn't a 6-week thing, this is a couple of years. But people were forced into making those changes to their onboarding programs and how they managed their teams. It wasn't a voluntary change that Admiral would have taken on, I suspect, right? So I think it's quite interesting to see how those dynamics played out. And obviously some businesses would have done better with that and others perhaps less so. And I think that's about their attitudes to working with people. It might have been the catalyst at my old business, for example, where we were looking to do more working from home and bits like that, but we weren't quite sure how that would work. And then we had no choice. Right, we had to learn how it would work and apply it as well as possible.
I've seen a lot of stories on LinkedIn or just generally in the news where it's like companies are now saying, oh, you've got to come back into the office. And people are like, well, I don't want to come back into the office. And they're sort of throwing their arms up in the air about being forced to come back into the office, obviously, despite the fact that their contract doesn't say that they could work from home. And I think it's a bit of a sticky situation, isn't it, in terms of I guess, forcing people to come back into the office, which they technically were hired to work from, but they haven't for like 2-3 years.
And then there's a big workplace statistic that I read in the Gartner report recently, which said that in Europe, something like 24% of employees are considered engaged in the workforce. So that means that they are actively investing into their position, right? Which leaves 3/4 of the workforce who are not. I think that's one of those big parts of that, right? Is that you want to feel like your relationship with your employer and your workplace is mutually beneficial. So if you take a contract on a provision that's something that's really important to you, and then someone imposes something different, then there's going to be those points of conflict where people aren't going to be as engaged. I think that's a real clear symptom. We've seen this go across the tech sector and public sector as well. And you can see retention figures in these organisations completely reflects, the decisions that they're making.
I mean, we've obviously spoken heavily about, I guess, what it means for your team and what it means as an employee. But the other side of the conversation is sort of what it means for your customers, especially in a customer-facing role like sales. So obviously we've spoken about it from the employee side, and your customers are employees in their own business, so that all of that still applies. But like, what does it mean for your customers from a customer facing role perspective?
Well, they're doing the same thing. I think that's the piece here, is that unless you're talking about manufacturing guys on the ground, so many businesses now have this hybrid working element where there is some remote working, some in-person working. And there's a point of view from a salesperson of interacting with these organizations where you might want to have that in-person meeting because it traditionally will help you to capture more information or move along your sales cycle. That's harder to arrange. But also you have to think about, these organizations of tying people together on their own side. You can't just turn around and ask one of your stakeholders, say, I've been trying to get through to X, Y, and Z. Is he in the office today? And again, they'd look around the computer and look around the kind of the floor, like in the background that you've got in behind you, to see if they're in there for you. And they can't. It's not there. Oh, they're green on Teams, might be the response. So it's very much changing how they work as well. And a lot of challenges that you see within your own organisation in terms of hybrid and people getting settled, they have as well. So you have to appreciate that both as a salesperson doing your selling, but also kind of take those considerations in your approach to people as well as appreciating where they are.
How, in terms of just like you and your team personally, then like how has it impacted? I guess we're probably talking when it first kicked off. How did it affect you in your role and your team's roles?
I think it's, what we had to do is a little bit more quote unquote enforced fun, right? Because you don't get that coffee machine water cooler banter, perhaps in quite the same way that you get remotely as in person. We've all been there waiting for a coffee and you have a bit of a laugh and get a bit of gossip from the guy from accounts or whatever it is. And so you find out this wider company context. And a lot of that, I feel, got lost during the pandemic, or at least you felt a little bit more guilty about just dropping someone's team call to kind of shoot the shit sort of thing. So there's that side there, and so I felt I had to bring a little bit more structure to some of those pieces. I think that was a big piece, of looking out for people's kind of well-being around that, of such a dramatic shift to how people are working. That being said, I think it's really energized me of coming back into the office. I'm somebody who really feeds off that energy, and I think a lot of salespeople are. We crave people's voices and talking to us and stuff like that. Otherwise, how could we cope with all these calls and meetings and stuff, which are essentially our jobs? So I think it's a big thing for kind of monitoring people, not in a big brother way, but just seeing people with a smile on their face, or if they're not looking great, and having a bit of fun to G them up.
Yeah, like one of the most basic forms of just human interaction and body language and general, like proper general personable interactions and things. What impact did you see from customers though, in terms of like difficulties in changing meeting styles, or difficulty in coping with the places they could be working, or the noise, whatever it was? Like, was that a steep learning curve?
I think there was the biggest thing I think that I saw was around the cameras off phenomenon, right? Where we've all seen it, where we're on a virtual meetings and somebody's got their camera off, and that was a big learning curve for me, because I'm not someone who's worried about having their camera off. But the reasons that you might turn it off, I had to learn, were very varied. It wasn't necessarily because they weren't paying attention to me. The reason you turn your camera off could be got a terrible connection, right? And leaving it on is going to break the connection. You can't hear anyone. I might be at home living with family or something like that. And so I might be a bit embarrassed of what's kind of going on in the background. I might be working from my kitchen and my mum's doing some cooking behind. It could be that I've woken up today and I don't feel great at all, and I look like rubbish, and I don't particularly want you to see my face while I'm doing that. I don't think any of those things mean that people aren't paying attention, though. They're all valid reasons to have a camera off on, and I was looking for those cues from client meetings, from meetings with my team, from their facial expressions, to see if they understood what I'm saying and whether they are listening. So I think that was a really big adjustment for me.
You've covered a couple of the, I guess, big changes, broad changes. Like, how did you, as a, in your role for your team, how did you take on board those changes and then change your approach or update your approach to account for the massive shift?
I think it's about acknowledging that thing around the kind of camera piece, that it's not the be all and end all. There are certain scenarios, right, where it's more important. Again, clients or new customers and stuff are perhaps not, I'm quite forward thinking and I get that message through the team. Just because the camera's off doesn't mean people aren't paying attention, but it's about ensuring that people are engaging in other ways, by requiring their responses to questions and getting people to interact. And that can't always be oral. Certainly when you get to a meeting size of, say, more than 5 people, it's very impractical to get everybody to respond to every question asked, because otherwise we'd be there all day, right, as everyone says their piece. But we still need to be inclusive of people. So I think that's the main thing, is giving those opportunities for everyone in the meeting to engage. And then they will feel heard. You'll understand, whether they are on board or agreeing with your topics and these sorts of things. And that was a difficult art to learn through that pandemic period. And I think it very much applies now in the virtual and in the hybrid scenario of ensuring that you have everyone's voices heard, and making sure they are engaged in your meetings.
How do you tackle that then? And do you have a tactic for, I don't know, every 5 minutes there's some portion that you have almost like in your head where you're like, right, I need to make sure everyone's still engaged. I need to do this. Like, how do you do that?
And I think that's understanding what you want to achieve on a meeting before you turn up, and ensuring that you have prepared ways to engage those audience. And it doesn't need to be, a strict thing of every 5 minutes. There are key topics and decisions that need to be made throughout your interaction there. So from a sales perspective, you might give a pitch, right? Has everyone understood that? Has everyone got any questions? And if you answer that orally, you're very unlikely to get any response, other than from the loud guy. I think it's, if you gave the option for people to say, something to pop on the screen and say, could you rate how useful you found that out of 5 stars? And everyone just clicks on a star rating. That barrier to collaboration and to put your input is much lower than raising a hand and kind of speaking. So I look to build into my sales meetings key questions that I ask non-verbally as a way of them responding back to me. And there's a whole load of different software tools that can help you do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you just ask them to put something in the chat? That what tools are you talking about then?
So there's some great stuff out there in terms of from a presentation slide, like Slido, like Mentimeter, ourselves at Klaxoon as well. We do stuff around that as well, where it's ways of directly asking questions and feedback of people relating to particular topics. So if I have an alert that comes and pops up to you and say, is this something that you want to proceed with? And it pops up in our Teams chat and it says the option of yes or no. That is much easier to collate the group opinion of that than flying round to everybody. Because as we all know, if you're on a serious sales meeting, there's somebody at the back who's very quiet, got their mouth shut and just kind of sitting back, listening to what you're going to have to say. Another person that you want to understand, actually, are they invested or not? So I look to require that participation and allow myself to see whether they are responding to me or not. Because if they ignore the question completely, well, that tells you another thing as well.
What you've given us a couple of examples there, but give us like 3 questions that you currently use during various calls as a engagement driver, let's say.
I think it is those classic things of, to show that we're active listening. As a salesperson, we should be active listening, and we should be rephrasing what we have framed as the client problem back to them. Right? If I was to do X, Y, and Z, and to overcome said challenge, is there a price point that you'd be comfortable with to be able to invest into this? And it's those really simple, arbitrary yes/no style things which will move your deals along quite categorically, which is quite different from our more traditional salesman's approach of asking open questions and getting people to talk, which still very much have their value, right, of understanding people's solutions and pain points. But if you want to have a clear move forward and a decision made, then actually you need to simplify those down on some points and go, if I could solve this, would this be a benefit to your organization? I don't want to have that as a big open question. I want that as a simple yes, no. Because if you say yes, brilliant, okay, we have a defined interest in the potential that we could fix a problem here. Yeah.
So you're basically saying that the questions that you need answers to in order to progress the deal, they're the ones that you turn into these more engaging, non-verbal, in some cases, i.e. the polls, the star ratings.
And yeah, absolutely. And also, by doing that, there's a number of people who are often on that meeting, and they have different reasons for being there. You may have a budget holder, you may have somebody who's got the pain points, you've got somebody who's technical, and you might have somebody who's a potential end user of the service or product that you're wishing to sell. And they're all there for different reasons, and we all need their total buy-in of everybody. However, not everyone's making the decision here. So I think it's obliging people's participation where even if your viewpoint isn't the one that they go with, Jamie, if they decide that actually, I really value your opinion, Jamie, but actually we're going to go with the other routes, having the ability to have your voice heard, even though it's not the route that people are going, people are still going to be more invested in the ultimate decision than if they just had that imposed upon them and were kind of talked over. So I think there's that, I've had the option to vote. I've had the option to kind of give my say through here. I think it's better for us to have that visibility of that as opposed to just being something that happens after the meeting, right? As the client goes away and does their own piece and say, look, we'll come back to you. Actually, I want you to oblige to kind of do some of those decisions now, just kind of get a view of the room.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've not come across that level of engagement in calls or meetings before, and it's interesting. It's not gamification, but it's got that whiff of gamification to it, which people, when it's like answer A, B, C, or D, like in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, like people like engaging with that sort of style of interaction, don't they?
We're humans, right? We are looking to have our voices heard, and then our opinions, we hope that they matter. And so if we give people that forum to do so, they are going to feel more engaged and more positive than if they're just spoken at.
It's interesting because I'm just thinking we use Teams, and I know on Teams, obviously you can do polls when you're on calls. And I think if you have a set of questions it's pretty standard process, right? If you have a set of questions, you almost can copy and paste the question into the poll. And very quickly when you're on the call, I'd imagine that you could add a poll into the chat if you didn't want to invest in these other tools.
And actually, it's funny to say that because it's somewhere I take a huge amount of my inspiration from was the Microsoft sales teams over the pandemic. So they would run their client workshops pre-pandemic on site, lots of senior stakeholders, consultants and stuff from their side to work with an organisation to help them understand, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? These kind of future ways of working scenarios. And over the pandemic, they had no choice but to take those on-site workshops, which were quite expensive to deploy, and put those online. And, the reason they did it on site because they would ideate and they'd have people kind of trapped into a room and, you'd hash it out and make some decisions by kind of putting those boundaries in place. And they looked to bring that approach over the pandemic by creating that kind of quote unquote room scenario, but obliging multiple people to be responding non-verbally as opposed to verbally, because there are clear challenges. We can't all talk at the same time, but perhaps we can write it all on a bunch of sticky notes and we can prioritize them all on a wall, right? One's at the top, the most important, the bottom, least. We can all kind of work with that stuff. And, Microsoft is still playing that approach post-pandemic now of actually using digital tools to enhance that non-verbal engagement because they saw such a benefit in terms of their sales cycles.
It's interesting because they released in the last few months, didn't they? There was a new tool that Microsoft released, wasn't there? That was like that collaborative workspace, wasn't it, or something?
Yeah, so they built up a whiteboarding tool. So they've got a whiteboarding tool they put out 6 to 9 months ago, which comes as part of your Office 365 suite now, and you can use it within Teams, very much endorsing that way of working, of that collaboration. There are other whiteboarding tools on the market. I think it's kind of your Microsoft Paint of whiteboarding in the nicest way. It's good for the basic stuff, but kind of limited. But I've got 20,000 salespeople at Microsoft who use our product monthly to engage with people in this way of that kind of collaboration piece.
We've had episodes in the past of like people sharing advice on like how you conduct the like effective sales meetings and tactics and stuff. But in terms of a hybrid world, then this hybrid sales rep acknowledgement, how do you go about conducting like the most effective sales meeting when factoring in all of these hybrid issues or opportunities?
And there's a big challenge in terms of where people are located for the meeting. And I think that's where a lot of salespeople come unstuck, where I might have some people who are, in the room with me, and it's whether it's kind of my side or their side, right? So if I go to a client's site and I'm meeting 3 people in person and 2 people are joining in for some sort of remote, either from another site or maybe they're working from home, it's very easy to get into one of 2 schools where you either talk to the screen and everyone who's virtual, or you talk to the people in person and you forget the people who are virtual. Yeah. And so you've almost just done a Teams meeting in person. What was the point of doing that in person other than the water cooler conversation before and after, going out of the office and stuff? So I think there's an acknowledgement that we need to conduct our meetings in a way that's effective for all audiences, as opposed to forgetting about one. And that's why I'm a big passionate person for involving people, not just orally, right? Because it's easy to forget and look at that one camera, whilst if you are sending some sort of poll notification right to everyone, that might pop up on mobile devices, it might send through to your computer if you work remotely, but actually getting people to all respond and interact in the same way, regardless of location, I think is really important. I think there's a side note of ensuring that the facilities are up to the job. It's if you're going on site with a client, it's not just about, do you have a meeting room available now? Is there a stable connection? Has it got the microphones and stuff that are built in? So it's like a Teams room, or actually, are we going to be relying on your own laptop's microphone and stuff to be picking up the audience and playing things out? So I think it's understanding your settings for the client and for yourselves. If you find yourself running a lot of hybrid meetings out of your own offices and you don't have some facilities with top quality microphones and cameras and that sort of stuff, you need to start speaking to your facilities team to make sure that's successful. You've got a great microphone and bits there, Jamie, because you clearly run a lot of virtual meetings or maybe hybrid meetings. So it's worth that investment as opposed to having some crackly connection that people can't hear you properly. You're wasting opportunities in that point.
So it's really about being more respectful of people's location, situation, and also acknowledging the fact that you both come 50% of the way in terms of if you're both virtual and you're turning up to a meeting that you're hosting, like you said, and you've got poor quality equipment and stuff. It's almost a bit like you don't really care about the call, or you don't care about the opportunity because you've not invested any or put any consideration or thought into turning up with the right information, the right answers, the right equipment.
Yeah, I mean, if you have somebody come along to your office who's a workman to come to do some work, and they don't come along with the correct tools for the job, you're going to think less of them, right? You've come to me, you're providing a service to here, and you haven't come equipped and come prepared, and that's on 2 sides. That's about the kit, the technology that you bring. That's one aspect of it. The other one side is about the competency of your methods. If you are treating it like a fully remote meeting and you're ignoring all of the people who are there in the room, then that's about your competency as a salesperson. So, like an engineer, we have to update our skills as the needs of our customers change and evolve over time.
Yeah, I do. We have a monthly town hall, and we have probably 50-50 split now in terms of who's in the room and who's remote. And it always is a little bit, you stand up with the laptop that's sort of in front of you on a lectern, I think that's what it's called, isn't it? And then you're like switching between the laptop that's kind of right in front of you with an awful angle of your chin, and then people in the room. And it's always a bit of an awkward situation, isn't it? Like you said, you're having a Teams meeting in person almost, which is weird.
And you think of cost of a business, so that's like a company-wide stand-up meeting, right, of rolling things out. And let's say it takes half an hour, and you say there's 20 people on it. So average salary for professional people in the UK is about 30 grand a year. So if you extrapolate the hourly cost down, that probably works out to be about £12 per person. 12 times per person. That means costing you a couple of £100 every time you run it. And if people getting distracted and looking at Jamie's lovely chin, or you could spend £100 for a half decent camera on a tripod. People aren't laughing at Jamie's chin. They are paying attention and they're a bit more engaged in the meeting. So in terms of an ROI for your camera on a tripod, it's really, really clear. But people don't stop to think that actually we could be spending just a small amount of money to make this better. And so it's more effective for everybody. And I'm talking hardware there, but that's about your approach as well. Does it really matter that we're looking at Jamie's chin? Should we have the laptop there, or actually is it probably better placed somewhere else completely on the rest of the room so we can see everyone's reactions? And that's part hardware, part how you conduct your meeting.
Yeah, it's a nice idea actually, because we use I've got a MacBook, and you've got a continuity camera on a MacBook now, which means you can use your phone as a webcam, essentially, like via Bluetooth. So you could just, like you said, chuck your phone on a £15 tripod, and it's a far more professional and immersive meeting. But in terms of some of the do's and don'ts, then, so let's do like if we can 3 do's and 3 don'ts of hybrid meetings. Then I think let's start with the don'ts. So 3 things that you would absolutely not do, or 3 things you try to avoid for hybrid meetings.
Yeah, so I think one of the big ones of things to do, right, is, it's both ways, I suppose. This is the problem with do's and don'ts, right? So you've got to understand, if you're on a client site, about what setup they're going to have and to anticipate that, right? If you turn up there assuming everything's going to work and that you're going to have a facility you may be very lucky that you work for an organization that invests very heavily in their meeting rooms, in terms of a client site that doesn't, it's not very good, right? Because you're going to be arriving there and not having the microphones and the cameras and stuff all positioning, and just assuming that's going to work 5 minutes before the meeting to get it all hooked up is very, very ambitious. So I think it's understanding where you are holding your meeting and to prepare for that accordingly. I think it's, don't ignore your audience. You need to appreciate that you have people there in the room, you have people remotely, and that you need to give opportunities for everybody to be engaged, to give and share their opinions throughout that meeting. And that's how you're going to need to do that regularly to keep their attention throughout. We've all done training, and we've all had death by PowerPoint. If you ask questions, require responses through that PowerPoint, the difference in engagement and chance of your pitch working is going to be so much better. Other do's and don'ts. I think we've gone through some of the preparedness about your own hardware and appreciating that. Don't underinvest on hardware that's going to support your people conducting these meetings. I think the other one is, don't underappreciate that the method is actually more important. It's in terms of remembering that approach to things. And I conduct that meeting with a slightly crackly microphone or a slightly worse quality camera. That's not going to make the hugest difference in comparison to, if I just ignore half the audience, that's going to matter a lot more than my shiny camera. So it is very much hardware and methodology of how you approach this stuff.
Yes, I think, like you say, if you focus too heavily on one or the other, right? If you get your methodology and you absolutely nail it, great. But if you've got terrible quality webcam and the sound's awful and the connection's terrible, like you're not going to be able to deliver that perfect methodology. And if your hardware's amazing, you've got a DSLR on a tripod and you've got a Shure MS7B microphone and it's like BBC News, but you can't sell for the life of you, then you're just not going to perform in either example.
Yeah, and a hybrid meeting is not an in-person meeting. There's some great digital tools out here that we can leverage that are much harder to do in person, right? If you ever worked with consultants and stuff pre-pandemic, they love getting out, props for you to work with. There's you get the A4, the big A1 stand-up boards where they start writing stuff down and all these kinds of things, because that stuff's engaging. It gets people moving and participating more than being sat there and kind of talking or listening. There's plenty of digital tools that will get you involved with that now. So, really embrace this kind of stuff, not just for the sake of it. You have to think about using the right tools for the critical interaction that you're looking to do. Is whiteboarding the answer to delivering live training? Maybe not. But actually, as you said, like some gamified learning activities, you can have those probably quite a lot more interesting than trying to necessarily recreate those all in person, and getting the people remote to try and do that in person remotely doesn't kind of work. So embrace these modern tools that will help you.
One of the best ones I used to remember from when they had trainers come in and do a big session for people at work is the old small beanbag, and they'd chuck it around morning and afternoon to make sure you were awake and you could catch the beanbag, and if make sure you were paying attention. Not quite sure if there's a virtual equivalent of throwing a beanbag at someone, but they always used to be quite good.
It's just about obliging people's participation. That's all it falls down to, right? Is I am obliging you to give me a response now, Jamie. You've got a beanbag in your hands, right? It's you, okay? And the beanbag is a gamified way of doing that, right? It's putting a quote unquote fun thing. The other thing we can do is like go, cool, Jamie, what did you think of that? And pull your name out quite directly. Some people are comfortable with that. And if your own team, I think you're a little bit more comfortable doing it. If you're pushing that hard on some clients, they may be less comfortable with it. But I think it's giving people those opportunities to engage and making that barrier to engage lower is where I go with it.
Yeah, I tell you what, I think my favorite one, favorite piece of advice or tip is that periodic engagement of the questions you're already asking, just make them more engaging in their delivery. And I think you labeled a few tools or listed a few tools, but whether you do that in Teams or whatever, but I think that was a really nice way of having more consideration of the situation people are in. I think again it goes some way to your prospect thinking, okay, they've actually put a lot of thought into that session to get the most out of it, and they'll come away from that feeling as if they've also given you the information that they asked for, which I think is almost quite a good feeling and almost sensation people leaving that meeting will have as well. Of tell you what, they got a lot out of me in that session, which if I was a prospect, I would respect that.
And it's hard to recall this stuff, right? When we talk about loads of stuff as a salesperson, we know that there's some questions we need to ask for whatever product or service you're selling to understand the scale and the need of your clients. So some of those are pretty repeatable. Those questions you're going to ask may well stay reasonably consistent to a degree. And by obligating the responses to those, you can get a real view of, as you say, from the client's perspective, are they engaged? Are they following through in the sales cycle? And from your point of view, it's going to help to inform your notes. Okay, they seemed interested. This person was saying that it could have this kind of benefit, but I didn't have the view of everyone in that room. I didn't actually get the decision maker to respond. But if everyone, you send a poll out and it's answered by 8 people and they all say yes, that's giving you quite a definitive view on where that prospect sits in relation to that concept.
Do you then share the results from those engagement points in the follow-up? Like where you
Absolutely.
say 92%, you said that you would find that valuable.
Absolutely, because I think it's a point of them being reassured that other people have got the same viewpoints or don't as themselves throughout because these people are all on this meeting for a reason. They haven't invited them for fun to waste their time. They believe that their buy-in is required or their opinion should be listened to in regards to the conversation that you're having. So they're all stakeholders in this. What influence they have on the overall thing is, but it's about understanding where everyone sits. And I think also it's a good thing from stopping you from biting you in the bottom later down the line when somebody looks to pull out of your cycle later. And you say, look, when we were talking about this earlier on, 92% of the people agreed that this was a process that was worthwhile implementing. This was something that would have tangible benefit into our business. So what's changed? What has changed that means that the 92% of people who are involved in this, that's no longer of benefit to the business. That's quite a big thing in accountability.
It's interesting. I was just if there's one thing that anyone takes away from this episode, I think it's try and implement some of that into your existing setup, format, whatever. Because I think if you try and change too many things at once, it's not going to work. But I think if you could try and just add some of those little engagement polls or scales or questions, gamification, whatever you want to call it, I think that would be a great takeaway. And I think we typically do a bit of a write-up after the episode. So I might get you to share just a couple of snippets, snipping print screens or examples of those sort of polls or scales or questions that you share, if that's all right.
No, absolutely.
But yeah, I think that's some really good tips and advice in there. And one of the last questions that we've been doing on recent episodes is podcast and nominate. So it's, who do you think I need to get on a podcast next and why?
I'd really like to see James Crowder from an SDR company called GCL, where they work with people all across Europe in terms of outreach, right? Securing, leads, opportunities, that sort of stuff. And that's really changed again over that pandemic period. And we've seen that solidifying. And I think it's a big thing for all businesses. I think now we need to make money as much as we always have, and knocking down that door where we have so many different AI tools. We've got, tools to enhance the amount of outreach that we can do within our sales teams, and navigating what the right approach is depending on your product and customer base can be really, really challenging. So I think, those types of insights are really, really useful now of, how can we balance all of these different things that are competing for our bandwidth and for our approach as salespeople in opening up opportunities.
Well, we'll sync up after and I'll get his details, and then I'll reach out. And if he doesn't reply, I'll get you to drop him a message instead and see if we can do it that way. But I appreciate you jumping on. I think we've run very, very slightly over, so hopefully you haven't got a demo that you're now late for. Because that's
just a sandwich.
Ruin your engagement. Just a sandwich. There you go. What sandwich? Out of curiosity.
No, I'm going out. So. I think a club sandwich. I'm feeling club sandwich today. Your bacon, chicken, 3 pieces of bread, toasted. Yeah.
If you get it, are you getting it from a proper place or just like a meal deal?
I will go out and I will peruse Birmingham City Centre for the best club sandwich.
I was going to say, if you're getting a meal deal, I was like, chuck it in the microwave. It sounds ridiculous for 15 seconds if you're getting just the Tesco club sandwich. Okay. It's game changing. Next time you get it, trust me.
Okay. No judge, Jamie. If I go and get a Tesco club sandwich now and it doesn't end up top tier, I'm coming back.
It elevates it beyond the meal deal.
Okay. Right, I'll take that. That's my benefit for today. So,
okay. Well, I appreciate you jumping on. Hopefully it wasn't too laborious for you. And for those that are listening, if you found it useful, please make sure you follow or subscribe to the podcast. And those who are watching on YouTube, again, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. And we will see you in the next episode.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time.